r/AskReddit. What used to be considered trashy, but now is very classy. The brand champion. Yeah, when did that happen exactly? I remember as kid champions were the shoes we got from Payless when my mom didn't want to buy the good stuff. Now it's got its own big stores. From what I've read, they started doing a lot of collaborations, as well as going for that retro 90s look which is popular right now. Filler is another brand popping up again. Rustic weddings. I got married last year, and that style was everywhere. I couldn't help but imagine trying to explain a rustic wedding to someone even just 50 years ago. You mean you serve drinks out of the mason jars intentionally? Lol, this is good. Rustic in general actually. Explain to someone 50 years ago your coffee table is made of old reclaimed barnwood, they think it's terrible, but nowadays it's sought after. Old reclaimed barnwood at least has some charm. A lot of antiqued furniture looks to be some garbage found at a TJ Maxx that's been thrown down a flight of stairs, beaten with chain links, and chalk painted, so it can be sold for a mint at a place that also peddles scented candles and fake autumn leaves. I sigh a little when I see some actually good vintage furniture that's been abusively redecorated. Recycling. It used to indicate that you were poor and needed the 2-cent bottle rebate. Now it indicates that you are educated and motivated to do what is right. I'm pretty sure most people recycle where I'm at, just because their trash bin would be overflowing otherwise. We are not allowed to have 2 trash bins unless we also get 2 recycle bins. In the 1950s in Australia, beer was considered a respectable drink for the moderate gent, while wine was for alcoholics. A few waves of Italian and Greek migration really changed things, and now wine is a higher class drink. There is still goon wine though. Goon is not wine. Goon is goon. Oysters were the food of the poor a few centuries ago. In New York in the 1700s it was the food of the poor because you could just walk down to the shore and break some off. But it was also the food of the rich. It was served by street vendors and in fancy preparations at hotels and restaurants. It's one of the few times in history that rich and the poor ate the same things, albeit for different reasons. In London, oyster carts used to roll around selling oysters for pennies. The Thames had huge amounts easily harvested. However, after a breakout of food poisoning and a few important deaths, it was discovered the sewage waste going into the river was making them toxic. After that, oysters were only harvested from further afield, driving the price up and thus making them posh. People who have no idea what classy means. I mean, tattoos and Alex. Classy isn't the same as socially acceptable. Further proof that Reddit is full of idiots. Reddit is where idiots pretend to be smart. Well, not necessarily trashy, but actors used to be on the same level as carnival workers. Kinda like gypsies. Now actors are some of the biggest names next to politicians or musicians. Honestly, these days I'd say actors are bigger than politicians. You can probably name more actors or musicians than you can politicians. To be fair, there's a lot of great actors out there, but not a lot of great politicians. Tiny houses. Spent all day watching tiny house hunters and can't figure out the difference between a tiny house and a trailer. Tiny houses are liberal trailers. Trailers are conservative tiny houses. I never thought of it that way. It makes a lot of sense. The color red on women. Yeah. It used to be that wearing rouge like red lipstick or blush was indicative of being a prostitute, and now it's a classic color that is featured by most luxury brands. YSL, Chanel, Horse Rouge, Ladies Leech. Being skinny. Having a big butt. Not being able to lie. Shakespeare. Future college English classes will be studying the societal influence of the meme. Theatre was for the masses, while poetry was for the educated and wealthy. Shakespeare thought he'd be remembered for his sonnets, and his plays would be lost to the sands of time. Although we still read and revere his sonnets, it's his plays that have had the greatest influence. Well, it makes sense, if not obvious now, but not at the time, considering something written to appeal to only the very upper crust of the society would have less influence than what the majority of the people were enjoying. But Shakespeare did not realize how much the will of the mass would dictate the society back then. Edit. Man sure knew he could get political and the people could have some effect in the society. But little did he know the people would really achieve democracy. Gin used to be a drink consumed by the poor because of its low price. Now it's become the alcoholic beverage of choice for hipsters and the sophisticated. It's trendy because it's the fastest liquor to distill. So every startup craft distillery pumps out a gin to tide them over until their other liquors are finished or until they go bankrupt. So when you get in at the ground floor finding these hidden secret places, chances are all they have ready is gin. We really want to sell whiskey, but that takes years, so we do gin and vodka for now. Hair growth / roots. Used to be considered trashy / poor, and now we have the root blend, root pull, village, umber, somber, etc. Yes. I lost my hit when I found out girls went to get their hair done and wanted to look like it's been 2 months since their last hair appointment. Right? I constantly get compliments on my hair, and I'm like, dude, you realize this isn't umber, this is me being too poor and busy to go to the salon? And they're just all over it. Please stop, my hair is horrendous. High / afternoon tea. Originally intended more for lower classes in lieu of dinner. To this day, when anyone refers to high tea as if it's a classy thing, I want to pass my head through a wall. It's what the lower classes call lunch, which would be served at high noon. That's my soapbox. Sorry. Edit. My sincerest apologies to the tea experts. I'm so sorry. Jess McCree's favorite meal. I'm surprised how big Supreme got, especially in China as a fashion label. It started as skaterwear. In my day, skaters were degenerates and latchkey kids. Before that, skaters were associated with the drug addicts in Bakersfield, CA, and Huntington Beach. Zero, Flip, Etnies, and E/S were clothes for degenerates. Punks make their own jackets / clothes. Buying stuff was for chumps to them. Lots of skaters were punks. Lots weren't. Still true today. I'm glad there are many different types of skaters and punks. Subcultures are good for society. Punks make their own jackets / clothes. Well, sorta. I used to buy most of my hit from second-hand stores. At least back then you could buy clothes for less than the cloth would cost. Military surplus stores used to be super cheap back then too. I could buy leather combat boots for $15 in a time, when most shoes cost $50. And docs in the US would cost even more. So duck that fashion bullshit. Unlike the movie bullshit, I usually didn't punk out my clothes. I actually still have, a black NATO jacket I got cheap from a surplus store, because duck that fashion punk $300 leather jacket crap. And that was my jacket for all my pins and patches. Sometimes I'd take a felt pen to my clothes or something like that on a whim. Rarely safety pins were used to legit keep old torn clothes together. But I hated that, because they'd pop open, and you'd get shanked in a rough crowd. Most legit punks just looked like regular poor people. No spikes. No leather. No green hair. That it costs money. A whole bunch of people who haven't got the faintest clue what classy actually means. This is what happens when we allow wretched common folk to learn to read. Tilt suck nose. Having good teeth. Back then, the more rotted your teeth were, the more wealthy you were seen as. Only the rich could afford sweets. Did they even know that sweets were bad for teeth back then? Doubt it. The wealthy used to think smoking was healthy too. Slightly obscure, wearing any watch, even a dressy one, with a tuxedo. Now it's considered fashionable, though there are still strict traditionalists and semi-traditionalists who insist a white gold watch with only hour and minute hands is fine. Slightly less obscure, wearing a sports watch with a suit. Dive watches are now ubiquitous in the business world. The Rolex Submariner in particular. Bond popularized this. Of course. Wristwatches were originally for women, while men had pocket watches. Because women were not allowed to have pockets. Apparently. That's another thing that's coming into play. Pockets for women's clothing. Living in the foothills / mountains. Places like Mexico to this day. The rich live lower elevations and urban center. The poor live on the hills. Opposite here in the US. I'm curious about how it is in other wealthy countries. Cities that developed before long-range transportation have wealthy and dense population centers, European cities. While cities that developed during or after long-range transportation are spread out, American cities. This happened because people had to live within blocks of where they worked before cars or trains. On the flip, being overweight was a sign of wealth and class, but now it means you eat like shit. I think it's important to note that being slightly overweight or on the higher end of healthy was more desirable. Being obese has always been unfashionable. If you were too obese, you would become a freak show fat man. Lobster used to be considered low quality seafood. Now, not so much. First thing that came to mind when I read the question. Creepy water insects. Delicious water bugs. Emily Ratajkowski. As someone who went to high school with her, she was a nice girl. And never really trashy. For women, a cloth winter coat was low class. Now fur is trashy. Fur seems to be considered trashy in the States. In Italy, not sure about the rest of the Europe. Fur seems to be the norm. People say fur is bad for the environment. I think real fur has to be better than fake fur. In the early 1900s, denim used to only be worn by poor people. Denim is mainstream today, but at best it's considered pedestrian. I don't think putting it in the classy category is right. Jails used to be fed to lobsters. That's impressive that a lobster can eat a whole building. They just ate all of the people. Dummy. Sort comments by lobster. Asking for the remains of a restaurant meal used to be a bit redneckish, but is perfectly acceptable now. I know that's not the same as classy, but still a big swing in the perceived okayness of this. How is that considered classy to do? Sure, it's socially acceptable, but certainly not classy. It's only classy if they fold them up in a tinfoil swan. Has anyone seen that in real life BTW? Eating salmon and whole grain bread. 500 years ago it meant you ate whatever was available. Today, at least in most of the world, it means you paid way more for that than other people paid their food. I suppose this is somewhat still up for debate, but opting to do a charitable donation in lieu of some small takeaway gift at your wedding. This has come into vogue very recently, like in the past 10 years or so. Before that, there were lots of snarky articles written about how trashy/rude it is to imply that all of your guests have the same social values and or advertise your contributions. But it's become the really popular as an option instead of giving someone a tiny bag of M&Ms or something useless that they'll throw away. I feel like takeaway gifts at weddings would be hard to decide. What would be inexpensive, yet useful that people don't have already? I'm open to suggestions if I'm wrong. Wine bottle uncorker/bottle opener, I'd assume if you use it, you have one. We gave a small jar of local honey to guests. It was very sweet. Shaving your pubes. Only prostitutes did to avoid STDs. Ah yes. Because when I see someone with shaved pubes I think now that's a classy person. Has anyone said lobster? So far 847 people have said lobster. Ripped clothes. Used to be trashy. Now apparently it's fashion. Nah. Still trashy. Trashin. Or derelict. So many people are saying lobster. That's a Reddit staple answer every time this question is asked 3-4 times a week. Bathing in the 18th century was considered disgusting because you literally sat in a tub of dirty water. Now, having a bathtub/jacuzzi tub as opposed to a shower basin is considered very nice. I still agree with the 18th century mindset. I usually take a shower before I take a bath because I don't really want to sit in me soup. I take a shower after I take a bath because I don't want to wear my soup after I'm out of the tub. Theater. Centuries ago it used to be attended by fishmongers and common folk and was part of low culture. Wonder if film and television will become elitist in the future. Opera was considered lowbrow entertainment, more for the behavior in the opera house, and Mozart, the rude little twink. This comment has the biggest peen energy that I've perhaps ever seen. The energy here is indeed so big peen that I moved into a position where my hands can touch the keyboard just to say that. Back in the olden days, public universities were considered inferior to their private counterparts. Nowadays, some of the best colleges are publicly funded. Most universities get public funding to some extent, but the top public universities are still definitely considered inferior to top privates. At least in the US. Berkeley and UCLA are great schools and academically probably just as good. But they really don't have the same prestige as Harvard or Stanford do. At least to the common person. Even though the only impressive thing about Harvard is getting accepted. Ducking like and subscribe.